I think for some years we've actually been living under an illusion. We've not been prepared to face up to just how much of an economic mess we're genuinely in. As we slip down the global league tables, we kid ourselves. Well, it's okay. We've got GDP growth. But there wouldn't have been any GDP growth over the course of the last few years if it wasn't for mass migration on a scale hitherto never even contemplated, and of course, excess government borrowing. That is all.
So that's interesting because he acknowledges there has been growth, albeit 1%, according to Rachel Reeves, but that is technically growth. He's attributed that to borrowing, but also mass migration, right? So it's interesting because one would think we do want to grow the economy. And if, based on what he's saying, we didn't have this mass migration, as well as the borrowing, but let's talk about mass migration, because borrowing is a normal thing governments will do, right? It is the way they access money and then they use tax receipts to pay it back. So borrowing in itself is not a controversial thing. And it is a way you would expect of basically growing an economy or even growing a business, right? If you seek finance from the bank, you are essentially borrowing to then invest in capital and then grow your business, other than an equity raise, for example. So that is a very common thing to do. What you wouldn't necessarily do is look for migration to drive economic growth. But he's acknowledged that that is one of the things that meant that as a country we could grow. And according to Rachel Reeves, we were one of the fastest growing G7 economies during this period, albeit being 1%, right? So it's interesting that this, in my mind, kind of contradicts their position around the benefits, economically anyway, of migration and the impact it's having. And I guess really where, if I interpret Reform's position to be fair to Nigel Farage, is that in his view, even though there may be growth in GDP because of migration, economic migration, let's say, what is it doing to British values, right? What impact is it having on the UK citizen that was here competing for that job before you had the economic migrant?